Hello, everybody. My name is Alexander Raskovich, and this is the sixth episode of the Healthy Living Livestream. Have you ever wondered why you oftentimes feel that urge to always watch more YouTube videos, to buy more books or clothes, or to eat more food, especially food that is very sweet? Well, it could be that you're addicted to it. And it's not the shopping or the dopamine hits after you make a purchase or even alcohol, cigarettes, or drugs that are addictive. It's actually all tied to one thing. And it's so universal and so widespread. And today, our very own Dr. Andrew Kaufman is going to discuss the very cause of addiction. I pretty much look forward to it. The stage is yours, Andy.
Well, thank you very much, Alexander. And yes, this is a topic that I have a lot of experience with, both personally and professionally. And I hope to enlighten some of you today with debunking some of the common myths. But before I get started, let me remind everyone to take my health sovereignty quiz to improve your freedom. This quiz will give you some tips and tricks of where you can focus in order to increase your knowledge of truth and exercise your freedom in your day-to-day life. So I encourage you to please check it out. Okay, so today's talk is about exploring the true cause of addiction. And of course, we have to start off with definitions. And I don't think it's very helpful to think of addiction as a disease or an illness. However, it is a condition of living that obviously is very difficult, not only for those in the mires of addiction, but those who have relationships with them. And so I'm going to use this operative definition for today's talk. And we are going to say that addiction is any behavior, so not a thing, but a behavior that causes or results in some kind of short-term or temporary benefit or relief or escape, but that the long-term engagement in this behavior has some form of negative consequences. And even though those negative consequences arise, you, the addicted individual, is unable to overcome that and give up the behavior. Now, this is something that is very, very common and can, of course, occur in different degrees of severity, but it seems that it's almost part of our modern culture. And this has been brought about and reinforced by our consumerist aspects of the culture. For example, where the public relations and advertising marketing industry actually tries to get us addicted to various products and services for their commercial benefit, very similar to how a drug pusher may try to promote addiction to the drugs that they happen to be peddling. And of course, this is echoed in the food industry and in the pharmaceutical industry. So those professionals and industries that we trust to provide, nourishing food and helpful medications are actually working on this commercial model. So there are many risks and minefields living in our modern world to get caught up in this trap. And almost all of us are caught up in some way, albeit hopefully very small and not very dysfunctional for the majority. But I mean to say here that when we talk about the objects of the addiction, so the specific behaviors that we consider addictive, one, they are not the cause of addiction. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more and present some data momentarily. But they really depend on our access and sociocultural exposure to these things. So, for example, if we are surrounded by a drug culture, if our parents are using drugs or our friends or peers, then we're more likely, if at risk of addiction, to end up addicted on those drugs. But if we are in a different type of setting, we can develop addictive behaviors in a variety of different realms. So this could be, for example, and this is not an exhaustive list, because, any behavior that can have those short-term rewards could end up being addictive. But these are some very common ones. So shopping, of course, which is directly related to consumerism, sex and pornography, where today the access is almost universal with internet pornography, whereas, just a generation ago, or when I was a young lad, you had to basically go to, some kind of theater or some kind of store to rent videos that was stigmatizing to walk into. So it was, difficult to get access. And in fact, when, teenage boys got a hold of one of these tapes, it tended to have high value because it was so difficult to get access to. Of course, gambling, which also there is more access today with all of the permission of various Native American groups of people to open up their casinos, expanding, and of course with internet gambling as well, and sports betting now being legal and such. Social media is a big one, and we know from some whistleblowers at Google and Facebook that this was actually part of their strategy to develop algorithms that could become addictive. And we all heard, the dopamine hit you get from a like or a share. Of course, drugs, including alcohol, we already know about, but of course they're among the list. Sports, spectator sports, sports betting, all of those aspects. Food, especially things with refined sugar and processed carbohydrates, but also with various food additive chemicals that may be addictive, flavor enhancers, things like MSG and all the different sources of it. For example, often when we see yeast extract listed as a food ingredient, that's really a source of MSG, a flavor enhancer. And of course, television and the media, which certainly were the bigger addictions when I was younger, before the age of the internet. So we see all these kind of addictive patterns and all these different behaviors and others. But as I said, these are not the cause. These are, as I would call, the object of addiction. So what does cause addiction, and how do we know it's not the drugs? Well, there are a variety of experiences I can mention, but let's start off with a series of experiments that have also been repeated and validated for most of the points, known as the rat park experiments. And these were in line of a history of experiments where they had, rats in a cage by themselves, and they would choose to take drugs like morphine or cocaine, and sometimes to the point of overdose. And this led to, the belief that the substance itself created the addiction. But some researchers in the 70s did this rat park experiment, as illustrated in this series of cartoons here, where they had one group of the isolated rats, by themselves in a cage with little stimulation, and then versus a large, rat community with recreational activities and procreation, males and females mixed together, and full social groups. And they found that when they gave various solutions of morphine, that once the solution was such that the rats would take it because it was very bitter and they had to kind of sweeten it to get the rats to take it at all, that the rats in isolation took much, much more of the morphine. I think this slide reports there was a 19-fold difference. So there were factors at play besides the drug, right? Such as the environment, the social stimulation, the ability for recreation and having a normal existence. And we know rats are very social creatures. They do not live in isolation like some other animals. So there were some, skepticism to the conclusions, and this experiment was repeated several times. And depending on some details of the protocol, there were some mixed results. But overall, the trend that the animals that were exposed to socialization and other stimulation in their environment had less use of these drugs. Not that they didn't touch them at all necessarily, but much less use, and not to the point of it being to their detriment. So if we could, define rat addiction, we might say that they did not become addicted when things were pretty good in their lives. But when they were isolated and caged, then that's when they resorted to this addictive pattern for escape. Now, let's think about how that might apply to humans, because we can, first of all, just think of some examples from our common experience. But also, there's some interesting data that I'll share with you. So, one is simply think about, well, when we might have a traumatic injury or experience a surgical procedure, we are given, right, the same kinds of drugs that other people become addicted to. So, we're talking about drugs, and drugs are a little bit different than other things, and I will explain that a little bit later. But we don't generally become addicted to those drugs. So, I received morphine when I was in the hospital with appendicitis many years ago, and then was given a prescription for more opioids to take home. And I did not, even though I used them because of the post-operative pain, I did not become addicted to those drugs, right? So it wasn't the drug in that experience. Now, I've also worked with many individuals who have been prescribed amphetamines, like things like Ritalin and Adderall, which are mostly given to children, but also given to adults. And I have not seen this, cause addiction in those individuals. In fact, many times they were very happy to be taken off these drugs, even though we know that other people do become addicted to those particular drugs. Now, if we want to look at something a little bit more objective, we can look at the experience of Vietnam veterans, because over in Vietnam, there was a lot of access to opiates like heroin, and there was a very high prevalence of heroin use among the US soldiers fighting in the Vietnam War. And as is published in the Archives of General Psychiatry, there is follow-up interviews of those individuals, in fact, almost 400 of them, who used heroin in Vietnam, to see, well, did they continue to use it as they returned to civilian life after the war? And only a small minority continued to use it. And there was a follow-up study in 2003 that actually showed that most of them already struggled with opiate addiction before even going to war. So we can see that this is further evidence that exposure to the drugs themselves is not what causes the addiction, but rather it was the dire situation they found themselves in, fighting in a war in Vietnam in a strange land with a lot of danger, that led them to use those drugs during that time. But when they returned to their families and civilian life, there was no longer a need to rely on that type of escape. So, what are the aspects of the environment or the social life that are actually the underlying cause that predisposes people to become addicted to whatever they may be exposed to in their cultural experience? So there are a number of factors here, and I don't think we can pin it down to one very, very specific thing. But let me start by reading a quote from Gabor Mate, and he's a psychiatrist from Canada who's pretty famous and has written some excellent books. And he is the first one that really made sense to me in explaining what's going on with addiction, that was distinct from, the official teachings I received in psychiatry. So here's the quote: "Not all addictions are rooted in abuse or trauma, but I do believe they can all be traced to painful experience. A hurt is at the center of all addictive behaviors. It is present in the gambler, the internet addict, the compulsive shopper, and the workaholic. The wound may not be as deep and the ache not as excruciating, and it may even be entirely hidden, but it's there. As we'll see, the effects of early stress or adverse experiences directly shape both the psychology and the neurobiology of addiction of the brain." Now, I have to say that my experience in psychiatry and in my personal life backs this up, that I did not encounter anyone with serious addictive behaviors who had good relationships and good career and was well adjusted to their social situation. There was always some form of turmoil or hurt or pain. And, trauma certainly was highly prevalent, but not the only aspect. So, Alexander, if we could bring up the next slide, a study looked at people with, internet addiction, okay, which is really social media, most likely. However, what they were looking at is specifically loneliness. Now, I have to caution you that when we don't have a gold standard test for loneliness or for internet addiction, these are subjective questionnaires with certain statistical properties. So we have to take all of this with a slight grain of salt, but it is significant here. So what they did is they reviewed all the published studies which looked at loneliness as a risk factor. And if we can go to the next slide, here is a forest plot because they did a meta-analysis, and each one of the dots represents one of the studies they incorporated into the analysis, and everything to the right of the solid line shows a strong relationship or a relationship between loneliness and internet addiction, and there's no relationship with the dots to the left of the line. And you can see that the overwhelming majority of studies showed a significant effect of loneliness and addiction, or correlation. And you can see this particular statistics in the effect line, and that dashed line is the mean or median effect size. So you can see it's quite significant to the right overall, and this gives us a nice empirical clue from some epidemiological observations. But I would say that it's not specifically just loneliness, but it is some disruption in our social needs of some form. So I've seen factors such as social anxiety, social isolation, and trauma that affects the ability to have relationships. So not just trauma per se, but the resulting social deficits and dysfunction from the effect of the trauma beyond the experience of it. Now, just to mention about isolation, we can look at the pandemic over the past few years, because when the lockdown commenced, right, we experienced isolation. We couldn't go out and do the things that we normally did to be part of a community. And we saw, of course, purposely, I believe, the liquor stores, the cannabis dispensaries were kept open. And we saw spikes, in addictive behavior, but not just with substances, right? Also with social media and internet use, pornography, all of those things, and also an increase in suicide and overdoses. And we know that actually these same kinds of stressors involving social turmoil also are independent suicide risk factors, such as social isolation, loneliness, and even addiction itself is a major suicide risk factor. So this is definitely something to consider. So what many have hypothesized is that there is some need that we have for healthy relationships, being part of a community, a family, a romantic dyad, a parent-child dynamics that we are not receiving, and we develop a relationship instead with the addictive behavior that somehow either satisfies those needs in some way or distracts us from our lacking meeting those needs, and provides a dysfunctional substitute. So let me go into a little bit about dopamine physiology. And we need to also take this with a grain of salt and realize that it may not be dopamine specifically, the chemical, but these are kind of the behavioral pathways that have been observed in terms of our reward system. Now, we have a system, right, where we have an internal rewards when we engage in certain behavior. And this is part of our repertoire, really, for survival purposes. For example, we need to have motivation in order to go and seek nourishment, right? Food and water. So there has to be some way or mechanism inside of us to motivate us to do this, and that's the reward system. Now, the so-called dopamine reward is really given there because of a desire. It's not from the thing itself. So, for example, and I heard this, from someone else's lecture, but it's a very good analogy. Let's say we're, on a road trip and we're driving along, and we see the billboard for some kind of fast food. Now that, depending on our state, and maybe not if we just ate, but most likely, we would enjoy that food, things like, cheeseburgers or fried chicken or tacos. And we might start to, get this desire that we're going to go and stop and get that kind of food and eat it. And that sometimes can be hard to overcome, but that is really the kind of dopamine reward. Now, if we actually get off the highway and go get that, by the time we eat it, we may not get any further reward. In fact, most likely we won't. And we might even feel bad, because we might realize that, oh, our tummy aches a little bit because this wasn't really good for us, but it wouldn't satisfy us the same way. And this is very similar to with injecting heroin addicts, for example, that they would feel distress in the absence of the heroin when it wears off. But then when they acquire it, right, it's not, they don't feel the reward or the relief when it's actually injected and goes in their body. It's when they see it, in the spoon with the flame to starting to be prepared for injection. That's when they get the relief, right? Because it's about the desire. And this is a very helpful system. So all of the behaviors that are good, such as procreation, hunting and gathering food, all will give us this kind of desire that will be reinforced through this reward system. Now, this is where the use of some specific drugs can compromise the system more so than other behaviors, although we do experience this with other behaviors. And that's because the drugs of addiction, right, directly stimulate this reward system. So in other words, we experience the reward again when these drugs precipitate a reaction in our body. And sometimes this can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, this also does happen with other behaviors, some more than others. Like it happens more with sexual climax, for example, than it does with eating things that are actually food, not processed chemicals. But this is part of the issue that leads to tolerance and withdrawal. Okay, so tolerance is when we need more of a behavior to get the same degree of response or relief, or in some cases, reward. And this is one way we can assess. So is there an addiction, or at least a physiologic dependence? Because tolerance can be thought of as our body's physiologic response. And it goes with withdrawal, that as we need more and more of the behavior, if we take it away or decrease it, then there will be increased distress, or in some cases, actually, the possibility of physical illness and even death. Because our system has basically reached a new set point where we expect that behavior, that substance, to always be around. And when we suddenly remove it, it takes time. It throws the system completely out of balance, and it takes time to adjust. And this is why sometimes addiction can start off because of the disruption in our social functioning. But it can be somewhat self-perpetuating, because whenever we might try to reduce or stop the behavior, we experience this withdrawal. And then the distress comes from the absence of the behavior, even more so than the original loneliness or social anxiety or response to trauma. And this is often why relapse is very common. In fact, it's the rule when it comes to addiction. So how can you, know if you're addicted to something, and what can you do about it if you are, or how can you help a loved one or friend who you believe to be suffering with addiction? Well, one way that will help you with both is what many refer to as a dopamine detox. And this would be where you would have complete abstinence from any potentially addictive behavior that you might engage in. And the way that you know or identify what behavior you might have some degree of addiction to is if you do a dopamine detox for 1 week, 7 full days, do you experience intrusive thoughts, impulses, or cravings regarding a specific behavior? And if you do, then chances are you could say that you have some degree of addiction to that behavior. So these are the things that you should completely abstain from in order to make this determination, as well as if you want to start off on a path to break the chains of addiction in your life. So you abstain from any media. So you're going to really turn your devices off and only be receptive for necessary communications and emergencies. Now with food, you could actually do a water fast, but you definitely want to get rid of any kind of processed food, junk food, sweets, and eat only clean whole foods. And if sweets are your things, you may consider even avoiding fruit. And while fruit may be a healthy food, and may not by itself, there might not be too many fruit addicts out there, it can reinforce the cravings for sweet things while you're going through this adjustment. So for a temporary period of time, it might be good to just hold off on even nature's healthy sweet foods. Any beverages, of course, besides water, because virtually all non-water beverages may have some substance that may adopt a pattern of addiction. Hobbies even, right? Because we can develop addictions to these. And the same thing with work. So be cautious to set limits for your work, or do this on a vacation. Or maybe you can already know how you are with work if you're unable to ever take vacations, or if you do take one, you find yourself actually working the whole time anyway. So hobbies, shopping. Okay, so only necessities, but no additional shopping. Socializing, which of course is going to be, a lot of it might be electronic these days, but including parties and sexual activities. So we're going to completely abstain from, sex with your partner, masturbation, pornography, or even just sexual fantasizing to yourself. And this will help you, make a determination if you are addicted to any of these things. And if you already know that you are, this is definitely a requisite to start off your, new part of your life to be free from these addictions. So what other things can you do to help yourself recover? Let me emphasize that everyone has their own individual path, and there's no recipe or magic bullet that is going to apply to everyone. So there are some principles, however, that can be very helpful, and some even universal. For example, in my opinion, one has to discover really what is the painful experience that is driving the addiction, or was the origin of the addiction in the first place. And then you must take steps to heal from that, recover, and figure out how to meet those unmet needs going forward. And of course, you must have a plan of taking steps to make positive changes in your life, including, stopping the addictive behavior, but also other positive steps to prevent the need for addiction in the future. So some ways that I think are good is, one, to express gratitude. And I recommend that you make this a daily habit, because even if you're in the most miserable state at your lowest of lows with addiction, I guarantee that there are still things to be grateful for. One, that you are still alive and breathing. Two, that nature provides all of the beauty around us that you may have not been able to see very clearly, and many other things at a very basic level. And that is a starting point. for you, and that will help you stay motivated. And when you're struggling throughout the day, I want you to think back about what you're grateful. So operationalizing it by, writing down a list either every day or at the beginning of your journey, and bringing it back, adding to that over time as there are more things in your life to be grateful for, like grateful that I made it through today. Um, think about the little things, but let it be there. Now, also having a way of spending time contemplating. Okay, this is where you don't have outside stimuli. You're in silence. You're in stillness. So it could be meditation. It could be prayer, or it could be a stream of consciousness. The important aspects of it, aside from the silence and stillness, is that you have some type of intention. And this is a great way that you can, one, generate insight about what are the factors leading you down this pathway, and also can help you establish goals, and plan them out when you give yourself this space. And then, of course, you have to follow that up with action in your life. And part of that is going to involve either repairing bad relationships or toxic relationships, or establishing new relationships, because we've really determined that your social well-being is a major cause related to problems with addiction. So this, involves realizing that when other people react to you, especially if they slight you or frustrated, etc., that you should not take it personally. It's about them, not about you. And this applies really to all situations. You have to be able to establish appropriate boundaries. And that means, ending or some relationships, not engaging with some people that you have the toxin patterns with, unless you're able to repair them. It means changing your approach to others that you're in difficult relationships with, because you cannot change them or require them or force them to change, but you can change yourself so you can interact with them differently, and then they will respond to you differently. And of course, developing new relationships and new communities that with more functional and well-adjusted people. And things like spiritual fellowship is an excellent way of doing this, because we have to, address this issue, of course, psychologically, as mostly I'm describing, but also physically and spiritually. So we need to have meaning in our life. We need to be always developing ourself, and trying to answer the big questions. And we also have to pay attention to our physical health. And of course, it's obvious if we're addicted to sugar and carbs, that our body is going to be suffering from that. But when we engage in addictive behavior, we often do it at the expense of our own physical welfare, and we have to start treating our bodies much, much better. So of course, that involves clean water, proper hydration, clean whole foods, and also our environment, our clothing, our cleaning products, personal hygiene products, indoor air, and all of those aspects, and everything together, will allow us to heal completely in all aspects. So I think I've given somewhat of a good introduction to overcome some of the myths that drugs and substances and behaviors do not cause addiction, that there is some kind of emotional or social root cause, often involving a dysfunction or difficulty in relationships, such as loneliness, isolation, social anxiety, and trauma leading to some kind of social alienation. And all of the mainstream treatment approaches, rehab, et cetera, do not really address this. In fact, they often serve either intentionally or secondarily to further isolate those with addictions from society at large and from the relationships. Even family interventions, of which I've been a part of in my life, use consequences. We're going to basically cut you off from relationship with us if you don't do what we want and stop, engaging in this addictive behavior, when what would really help them would be the opposite, to bring them in closer, and such that they ultimately wouldn't need the addictive behavior any longer. All right, Alexander, I'm ready to take a few questions.
All right. That was an excellent presentation, Andy. Well done. We have a comment from, let's see, Cups of Sunshine. I want to get off of 4 beers a day, and I hope this video will help. Well, I certainly hope so as well. Cups of Sunshine, very appropriate name. Let's go to Ayahuasca Found. What are your thoughts about psychedelic use to address the root cause of addiction?
Well, I'm very glad you brought that up, because I had intended to mention that. So I think that, let's call it shamanic medicine, because ayahuasca is not the only substance that can be used for this type of purpose. And even in the mainstream, at institutions like Johns Hopkins University, they've done experiments, for example, with psilocybin mushrooms, with mental disorders, and I believe there's some data about addiction. So I think that what I was saying about contemplation, where you can gain insight, and it can help you, increase your motivation and set goals and come up with a plan, that process can be greatly accelerated in an appropriate plant medicine ceremony, with the appropriate guidance and with a serious intentions. So in other words, not, going to use hallucinogens as a recreational endeavor, but, to try to understand what's going on. And I have seen, anecdotal examples where someone, just with one experience with these types of plant medicines, that they, develop incredible insight, and after that, no longer have a need to pursue the addictive behavior, and totally turn their life around. And if you are attracted to that idea and believe that it will be beneficial for you, I say by all means, please, make sure you find an experienced and competent, individual to guide that ceremony or experience, and make sure that you trust them. But by all means, that's an excellent path forward to pursue, and I fully recommend that.
All right. Very intriguing answer, Andy. Let's see. Dooma Juice says, I'm addicted to the truth. Hell yeah, that's what I want to hear. We have
Well, now that wouldn't qualify for an addiction, because well, I guess there are negative consequences, now that I think about it, Alexander. But it depends how you frame them. So being alienated from the mainstream, you could think of as negative, but actually it could also be thought about the other direction. So that's an interesting idea. But I don't offer any suggestions to break your addiction to the truth. I think you should become more addicted to it.
All right. We have Women for Trump. Do you believe narcissistic abuse makes you more susceptible to addictions?
Well, if you are in a close relationship with someone who is abusive, whether they're narcissistic or not, of course, that is exactly what I was talking about as a risk factor for addiction. So I think, we need to be able to address these relationships in our lives, and realize that, one, we don't deserve to be, mistreated over and over again, and we can try to change our way of behaving in the relationship, and see if we can resolve that situation. But we reach a point, and this, if the abuse is serious, this point should be reached very quickly, when we decide that it's no longer safe or a good thing for me to stay in this relationship at all. Now, if we have a pattern of finding partners who are abusive, then we have to look at ourselves and say, why do we keep finding these types of partners, and what needs are we trying to have met, and how can we change this so that we don't end up in this situation anymore.
All right. That's a great one, Andy. Let's see. There was one that I found very good. Pretended chase. When I smoke a joint, I immediately afterwards feel guilty. Why is that?
Well, there are, of course, going to be your individual reasons about why it may be guilty. Are you hiding it from someone? Is it getting in the way of you completing some productive activity, right? There must be some negative consequence of it that you feel guilty for. But what I was talking about earlier with the dopamine or the reward-based aspect of it, right? That when you are kind of thinking about it, that you want it, right? You have the desire for it. You get it out. You start rolling it up. You feel the reward during that time, but actually, smoking it and taking it in yourself, that is going to be less rewarding potentially, right? Because cannabis is not as strong as of a reward or dopamine response as other drugs like cocaine and heroin, etc. So I think it probably is, related to that pattern. But I give a lot of consideration to, what are the negative consequences for you? Who in your life doesn't like it when you do that? That may be the more of the direct cause of the guilt.
All right, excellent. Last question from S. Derry. Could you please comment on addiction versus habit, i.e., drinking coffee in the morning, for example?
Sure. Well, I think we go right to the negative consequences here. So, does long-term use produce negative consequences? Do you use it? I'm sorry. So, the negative consequences is really, the main thing that establishes, whether it's an addiction or not, and that is going to be somewhat subjective. Coffee, in terms of the medical research, is heralded as one of the most beneficial substances to many, many different organ systems, according to all the medical literature. So it doesn't seem to have a negative physiologic effect. I mean, there's even a study that shows it decreases your suicide risk. I remember we used to talk about that when I was in psychiatry. However, you can overdo it, like with everything. So, if you're just drinking coffee all day long and it's making you jittery and you can't fall asleep properly and you have consequences with, rest and sleep wake cycle, then, that could be a form of addiction. But habits, are something generally that are positive in the short and long term. Or maybe they might even be negative in the long term, but positive and negative in the short term, but definitely positive in the long term. So there are things we're trying to, have a repeated pattern of behavior, but it is always going to be different from the addiction, or it could become addictive in certain circumstances, right? Things like work. Work could be a very positive habit to be productive, make a contribution to the world, have a livelihood, make a living. But it can also become addictive if you're doing it more and more and using it to avoid other things and having negative consequences such that you ignore your family, your children hates you, your wife leaves you, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, that was excellent, Andy. Now, that was the sixth episode of our Healthy Living live stream already. It's been a very, very long road already. And next week, we're going to be talking about biosolids, which is like a sewage sludge fertilizer that is used in a majority of our agriculture. And I pretty much
Yeah,
look
this
forward to
was,
that one.
I call this the biggest scam since adding fluoride to the water. And most people know.
Oh no. Andy, are you still there? I believe Andy has disconnected. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please take a look at the quiz that I put in the link. Make sure you take it. Oh, there you are.
Yes, I'm
Right.
not sure why I just disappeared for a second, but there have been a couple of brownouts that I've experienced at my home today, so it could have been one of those. But
Okay.
yeah, I was just saying that most people know nothing about this whole biosolids scandal, so it'll be important for you to tune in and see if you are directly or indirectly affected by it.
All right. Make sure to take the quiz, ladies and gentlemen, and it's fun and very quick to be able, and you can do it very quickly. And I put the link in the description, and I will also put a link to the newsletter. And make sure you sign up for those to never miss another announcement. Now, without further ado, we'll see you next week. Cheers.